Hi everyone, this is Nick from the Digital Arts Experience, continuing with the explanation of the D&Ds. In this tutorial, we are going to continue examining spells, and we're going into another layer here. So if you haven't looked at my tutorial on spell slots, it's sort of the introduction to how spells work, go ahead and look at that first, and then come back to this one because it's going to go into more details. So let's jump in. When you are about to cast a spell, there are some things to consider. We've got the time it takes to cast a spell, the range. The hit and DC come into more of an effect when you are targeting or trying to see if the target can resist. We're going to cover this one in a different tutorial, but just know that it's there. The effect is basically a quick description, and then there are some additional notes for how long the spell lasts, and some additional things you need to consider when you are about to cast it, to see if you can even do it in the first place. So we're going to work our way down the line, and then we'll look at Fireball in a little bit, because that's a very popular spell, so that will be fun. So let's say that Grum Grum is fighting a goblin. And Grum Grum finds this goblin to be very annoying, so he wants to cast Bane on the goblin. Now the problem is that Grum Grum's got a choice, because this spell takes one action to cast. So if he takes that action, he will no longer be able to take the attack action on his turn, because the spell takes the same amount of time. So making sure that you pay attention to the time a spell takes to cast is very important, because that's going to change your strategy up a little bit. Vice versa, however, his Shield of Faith spell only takes a bonus action to cast. So he could do that first, and then use his primary action to attack the goblin if you wanted to. You can still go ahead and cast Bane, it's just you have to wait until your next turn and then go ahead with your regular attack action. So it just depends on how you want to do it. And of course, you need to make sure you have spell slots available. Next, we've got range. Now, spells typically require you to focus on a target or a point in space. There are some exceptions, but generally you need to be able to see what you're targeting. If you can't see it, your spell does not allow you to like go around corners, or it's not an area of effect, you will not be able to cast the spell usually, or your dungeon master may impose disadvantage if the target just turned invisible, for example. But generally, if you can't see what you're targeting, or it's blocked by something, you won't be able to hit it even if it is within range. And a lot of spells have specific ranges. So if that goblin is 40 feet away from Grum Grum, he's not going to be able to hit him with Bane, which is a bit of a pain in the tuchus. So Grum Grum, however, can move 10 feet and then cast the spell. So again, make sure you can see the target, and then making sure that it is within the spell range. Guiding Bolt, on the other hand, which is a very awesome spell, it has 120 feet of range. So you have a lot more targeting options with Guiding Bolt. Again, assuming you can see them. The hit and the DC are going to come into play when you're making attack rolls with certain spells, or there is a saving throw your target needs to make. I'm not going to go too far into detail about this. Just know, again, that they are there. This is going to get into number crunching. I'm going to come back around to that in a little bit. The effect is basically just going to describe what the spell does. It's basically a quick summary of the spell result. So in this case, Bane is a debuff because it's lowering the numbers on your targets for different variables. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I got caught up on buff and bless and tried to combine them together in some weird way. I was going to try a bluff. So bless is a buff spell because that allows you to increase your numbers for when you're attacking or resisting things. Guiding Bolt is an attack spell, so they're listing the damage here. If you ever want to read up on the full details of a spell, however, you can just go ahead and click on it, and then D&D Beyond will show you all the full details. This is just a quick summary for you. Now, we're going to move over to the notes section, and I do find it interesting that they have placed these items here, because these are actually really important for you to keep track of. Excuse me. So first off, let's take a look at the V, S, and M section. So these stand for verbal, somatic, and material. So in addition to making sure you have a spell slot, making sure that you're within range, you need to make sure, and of course that you've got the action available, you need to make sure that you can, for Bane specifically, be able to speak, be able to move your hands, and you need a material to cast the spell. So when you are casting a spell, you generally need to make sure that you can speak, say the magic words, you can move your hands, so do whatever, crazy sigil movement or action or Naruto finger pose you need to do in order to channel the energy. In addition to that, some spells have a material component. In the case of Bless, you need a sprinkling of holy water. So if you are lacking in any of these three things, you don't have the holy water, you cannot move your hands, or you cannot speak, you will not be able to cast the spell. It doesn't matter how many spell slots you have. Now, with this said, generally these don't come into play very often, but if you are in a situation where your hands are bound, or there's a spell on you that restricts you from speaking, then you're going to be very limited in what spells you can cast. There are some that don't require certain things. For example, there are some spells that only have verbal components, some spells only have somatic, but some of them usually have a V&S combination, and again, there are some that have material components. Now, a really quick note here, if a spell has a material component, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have this on you. The creators of the rules realize that this is a lot of stuff to track, and not every player is going to want to keep track of spell components. Some really enjoy it. I do occasionally dive into it, but there is a rule in D&D where if you have a spell casting focus, you do not need the material component. So an example of a spellcasting focus is, for example, say a magic wand. There might be, say, a holy symbol for the cleric. A druid may have like a crystalline rock. It basically just helps you focus more energy, and you can ignore the physical material requirement. So don't get discouraged if you find out that a bunch of your spells have these material options. Generally, every spellcaster has a spellcasting focus when you start at first level. So if you never actually made one, just talk to your DM and we can figure that out. Really quickly, though, a quick note on the materials. If there is a material component for a spell, such as we have over here, Bane requires a drop of blood, ew, you, again, can use your spellcasting focus to ignore it, but there are some spells that have a gold value listed as GP next to it. So if this had, say, a drop of blood worth of 5 gold pieces, or say, for example, Bless requires you to buy, 5 gold pieces worth of holy water. You cannot get around using the spell casting focus because you need a large a quantity or amount to cast that spell. So just keep in mind that if there's a gold component, a gold amount listed with a material component, you cannot use your spellcasting focus on it. But don't worry, those spells are not as numerous as they appear to be. They are generally for very specific spells such as Resurrection or Raise Dead, that kind of stuff. So just keep those in mind, in addition to having the spell slots you need to cast the spell, seeing what components you need for the spell, time, range, all that good stuff. This is why spells are a little tricky to cast, because they have a lot of components to them. One final thing we're going to go over in this tutorial is the duration. Spells do not last forever. Some spells only last a moment. For example, Guiding Bolts will only last for 1 round, but that makes sense because it's an attack spell, versus, say, Bless, which only lasts for a minute. Now, what does that mean for combat? Well, every round of combat is 6 seconds, so this means that this spell lasts for 10 rounds, which is a pretty long time. So what I recommend is when you are battling it out, just have a piece of paper. Every time it comes back to your turn, put a little tally mark on your sheet, and when it gets to 10 rounds or 10 tally marks, this spell has ended. So it's just something to keep track of. There are some spells that have insanely long duration times, such as Shield of Faith. This has 10 minutes, which I believe equates up to 100 rounds of combat. In that particular instance, I think your DM would be okay with you not keeping track of it. Some of these spells have these listed to make sure that they are just not up all day and we forget about it. So in addition to your components for the spell, the time it takes to cast, the range, and the spell slots, these are all the things you need to keep track of to make sure you are capable of casting the spell, and then you have the duration. So that's going to wrap up this particular tutorial on spells. In the next one, we're going to go over concentration, specific effects, and I think we'll actually save Fireball for the next one because we're going to go into area of effects a little bit more and the specific shapes. So we'll hold that off for the next tutorial, and I will see you there.